Well, half.
You have alligator arms.
Half. What do you mean? You mean T-Rex arms?
Like T-Rex.
No, I don't. I have T-Rex legs. My legs are short.
I'm joking. I'm Josh Sigman, and I'm a mortgage lender. I'm also a geek for money, not just earning it and saving it, but literally everything about it. I love that money has rules. It has its truths. I love investment strategies, and I love making money work for us. For so many, money is emotional. For me, it's logical, like a puzzle. My passion is also helping others with their money. I love looking at people's finances, dissecting their puzzle, and rebuilding with strategy and purpose, and I'm really good at it. I'm making this podcast about my money strategies, not the things that are written in books or sold in programs. It's a podcast outlining the lessons I've learned and used for the past 15 years. These strategies help me and those who use them save more, give more, create wealth, and retire early. Let me teach you how to build your net worth. You ready? Welcome to Sigman Sense. All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Sigman Sense. We are in month 4, we figured out, 4 of COVID.
Yes.
And it's sad times. If you're probably going to be listening to this in about a week after the recording. And so today we just found out that Texas is shutting down once again. You know, bars are going to be closed at noon today. So there goes your afternoon drinking there, Brynn.
Right? Dang it.
But, you know, the conversation became very obvious what we should talk about right now, because there's 3 things that have been happening over the last 4 months. Obviously, the first one's the sad stuff, which is there are people getting sick and some dying, right? Yeah. Second one is a more fun subject. There's going to be lots of babies happening in the next 6 to 9 months from now. And third thing, unfortunately, is that there's a spike in filings for divorces.
Yeah. Too close to quarters.
Yeah. Well, people are waking up and looking at each other for 3 months in a row and saying, am I really going to be stuck with this person for the rest of my life? Right. Now, yeah. This is a money conversation, and that's what the podcast is about. So I'm going to focus on the third one, although, you know, we'll probably do another one for the kids because that's good news too.
Yeah.
But, you know, let me start by saying I don't support divorce. You know, I think it's better served to try and figure out how to make it work, right? Go get some therapy, all that stuff. You know, if I were to give you a really direct money saving tip, it would be it's cheaper to keep her.
And I say throw a hashtag in front of that. Hashtag cheaper to keep her.
Cheaper to keep her for sure. So, you know, that doesn't help. In fact, I remember Chrissy and I got in a pretty good doozy of a fight about a decade ago. And I literally remember her looking like, you know, men and women know how to cut deep when we want to, right? Like, especially your spouse.
Straight for the jugular.
We can go straight for the jugular. And I felt like I was winning our conversation.
Of course you did.
Of course. And then she looked me straight in the eyes.
Thought is the key word.
Yeah, she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, honey, just remember you're not near as good looking with half your assets.
Boom.
And I was like,
correct.
Yes, ma'am, honey, you're right. I will shut up.
Correct.
And that's a good reminder to us all, right? But that being said, we do need to talk about some things with divorce, because I'm getting, in my mortgage profession, I'm getting questions weekly. Several past clients a week are reaching out at various stages of divorces, whether they're thinking about doing it, whether they're in the midst of it, or they just completed a divorce. And
it's interesting for me because I'm 35 and I am just now kind of entering the phase of my life where my friends are where my friends are getting divorces.
They have to pick sides.
I mean, that is such a real thing. And it's not, what's funny is you don't really choose. It's interesting where you fall, right? On either side. But yeah, it's interesting because for the longest time, I never had to deal with it. And now it's really popping up a whole lot more.
Yeah. I do feel like people woke up after 3 months of looking at their spouse and like, am I really going to be stuck with this person for the rest of my life?
I mean,
you know, they got a flash forward of what retirement might look like. And if they didn't like it, they're opting out. And for the, you know, obviously there's different scenarios. You know, if somebody's making bad choices, then the other one absolutely should bounce. If somebody, you know, there's different reasons for divorce.
There's different reasons.
And I've also had people that have found the love of their life after divorce. So I get that.
I know. There's, you know, it's hard to say I don't believe in it. Although I've never been divorced, I really believe that there is no plan B for me,
right.
or Randy or our marriage. But because I've never had those thoughts enter, it's also hard to have the perspective of what it's like, you know? And so, but I know we definitely entered in saying we get we're doing one time, baby.
Yeah.
So
it's funny, Christina, our arguments get shorter because my wife and I, after 16 years, we just had our 16th anniversary, 16 years later, you know, even when you get mad, I'm finally like, well, I'm stuck with you forever, so I might as well get over this.
I mean, how long do I want to be pissed about this?
Right? I just gotta get over it.
Gotta get over it for sure.
But yeah, so what I wanted to talk about is specific to mortgages when it comes to divorces for a minute, because there are, you know, there's a couple of different ways to get divorced, right? As far as, you know, are you going to actually do some sort of mediation or collaboration to try and save a relationship and make good decisions, right? Or are you going to actually go and whether what state you're in, you know, Texas community property state, which is pretty straightforward, 50-50, versus some states, if you're listening from a different state, there's something called equitable distribution, which is a fair break of it, but it doesn't mean it's 50-50.
Interesting. Well, though Texas being a community property state trips a lot of people up.
Oh yeah.
I mean.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there's some really weird things that can come of that, you know? One of the friends that I have that just went through a divorce, she had a property well before she married her husband. It was hers. She bought it on her own, and they recently got a divorce, and he was trying to take half of that property. And logically, it seems so weird, but because it's a community property state and they were married, he is entitled to 50% of everything.
Well, if they almost, my understanding is if they both contribute towards paying for the expenses and they commingled funds, then yes.
And see, they didn't. No.
So I'm not an attorney. I don't have a JD, but I get to see this a lot. That's exactly the kind of problems that we're talking about. Why I think this is a good discussion for the day. But yeah, so somebody enters a marriage owning a property beforehand. They marry a deadbeat, which happens every once in a while. You know, this is where you have conversations ahead of time, obviously.
Yeah.
But if you have that property sole and separate, and you always maintain it, pay for it out of your own bills, your own income, then afterwards, even a community property, you can lay claim to that property. However, if two incomes are going into the same bank account, that bank account is now paying for the mortgage and for the utilities and for that house. There's the judge and the attorneys are gonna have a field day, and it's gonna come down to who's got a better attorney, unfortunately, because that's gonna be this kind of civil disputes that people get into. And I don't want to go down the path of how to do it. What I think my point of today is there are lots and lots and lots of horror stories that happen when people are trying to do the right thing, when they're trying to work it out, when they're trying to do mediation, when, you know, every once in a while someone would say, well, hey, you know, what's this? We both love each other. We're just not going to work out. We already agreed. We did this $1,000 deal to get the divorce. And I'm like, I always cringe. 'Cause I'm like, okay, so you got zero guidance. So what are we trying to accomplish? So here's what I mean by that. So what people need to understand is and by the way, I do have some backing on this. I got a certification actually through RCS-D. Professor Murray, who's a JD from Harvard Law and Stanford before that, basically created the certification course. And so I do know enough to be dangerous because I got a certification.
And the certification is specifically for mortgage lenders?
Mortgage and real estate. Yeah,
mortgage and real estate.
Right. The whole point of it is to help people and counsel people on what the right and wrong way to do things is, because of the things that, you know, an attorney typically handles 30 to 60 case files a month, right? And they typically have somebody else on the side helping them out with the paperwork, and they rely on information that usually the client provides, which being somebody that gathers documents daily for mortgages, a lot of people omit things from those. And it's not necessarily because they were intentionally omitting things.
Correct.
They weren't asked for it, so they didn't provide it.
Right.
And so if you don't ask exactly the right questions, you can miss out on things. And so what ends up happening, when people need to understand is that once there's an agreement in place, there's no backsies. Like once a divorce, you're right. Like you can't say, oh, I made a mistake. Let me go ahead and change this stuff. No. It's not how it works. And so let me kind of give you some splattering of thought processes about why you want to consult. If you have a house, consult your mortgage person before you finalize your agreement. Okay. The three things I think about are, number one is preservation of credit.
Which we see all the time.
All the time.
Credit goes to shit.
That's not my credit card, but you're both on it. And jackass decide to stop paying it to screw you. It happens every day. I see it all the time.
Or one partner or one person in the relationship is in charge of paying the mortgage, and oops, the one was slid in just a few days late, and now credit is
toast.
Toast.
And I'll get into specifically how impactful that can be, but credit preservation would be a first thing. The second thing I believe is super important is the preservation of home ownership. So if one of the two parties wants to keep the property, then structuring it correctly and having things upfront before mediation is super important. Meaning there's something that Professor Murray describes as we'll use the term, the out spouse and the house spouse.
The out spouse and the house.
So the out spouse is leaving.
Out spouse is
the
leaving,
house spouse is going to stay and keep the property, right? So daily I see a stay-at-home man or woman, like there's the working mom or dad versus the stay-at-home mom or dad sometimes. And that stay-at-home mom or dad might not have worked for literally 6 years.
Yeah.
Now they might be agreeing, and this could be an amicable situation where the out spouse says, hey, I love you. I'm going to take care of you. Let me go ahead and pay you this much child support. I'm going to even give you a little bit of alimony for a little bit. You get to keep the house, right? Mm-hmm. But the house already has $300,000 of equity, so I want to take half that equity out. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to agree on, you agree that I should get $150,000 of that equity, and you're going to refinance. Once we get this done, you get to keep the house. I'll pay enough money for you to qualify for the mortgage, and then I'll take my $150 to go buy the next house, right? So you can kind of hear that dialogue happening, whether it's between attorneys not nicely or between potential spouse breakups, somewhat amicably, right? Well, just because that's the plan doesn't mean that person qualifies for it.
Gotcha.
Right? So for example, if somebody's not worked ever, depending on the loan program and certainly depending on credit, even in an amicable situation, there's a certain number of months that have to go by of receiving that child support or receiving that alimony before you can use that income to qualify for a mortgage. And it has to continue long enough, more than 3 years after closing, to actually use that income as well.
So the kids' ages
ages of kids matter. So if a child is 17 years old, it's great that you're going to get $5,000 a month or $2,000 a month for child support, but it ends in 18 months, right? Or whenever you agree. So it's really important that, meaning that spouse has zero income to qualify off of if that's what it is. Somebody that's been part-time. Right. We have a lot of people that have been part-time for lots of years. Then they took off a couple months because of COVID.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You don't have an income unless you get a full-time salary back.
And then what about if they haven't been working, but during the divorce, they obviously go and find a job? Well, how long do you have to have it? How long do you have to have a job?
Again, it's dependent on the loan type and down payment, but the typical answer is 6 months.
Yeah.
Back on a job, if you've been off, in some cases, a full year before you can actually use that income to qualify, depending on how much time you've been off. You've been off for 2 years.
You really kind of have to plan for the divorce to get it done right.
Or one of the spouses will be upset afterwards because, hey, you said you were going to be able to do this. Right. Doesn't mean that they...
Or, when you start learning all of this information while you're in the middle of getting the divorce, what started out amicably
ends very poorly.
This is where people start getting pissed. Yep. And then you start getting into the petty, poking of the bears and trying to, make them pay and make it hurt because of the situation one has been left in.
That's right.
That actually paints a pretty good picture for me personally.
And so the whole point is that if somebody needs to, and the third thing would be I kind of wired in the second one, which is paying somebody off, taking cash out of property because most of the wealth of Americans are in either their house or their 401k. 401ks are easy division depending on how it's set up in what state, but the house, it's more difficult to get cash out unless you sell it outright. So you've got to be able to qualify to cash out a loan to be able to do that. And there's every state's a little bit different too, but you can do something called an OLT in Texas. Texas is a maximum cash out state of 80% loan to value, so 20% equity. which is, I think, a good thing in general.
Totally.
Unless they're specifically written correctly in a divorce decree, which is interesting. So you can exceed that 80% loan to value. You can go up to max loan amounts, 5% down, 3% down conventional loans or FHA loans, 3.5% down, as long as it's written the right way in the divorce decree.
In the divorce decree.
So if it's omitted from the divorce decree, you can't do an LTD, right? So there's different things that you can do up front. So let me just kind of tell you the basic process of a divorce and the point by which things need to be done already, or else you're kind of stuck with what you're left with, right? So you first have a petition response, basically somebody files, right?
Okay.
Now remember that all divorces start and end with a judge. So that's an easy kind of bookend. So everything kind of starts and end with a judge. The second stage is always scheduling orders. So what's the time frames and all that stuff. The third is discovery.
Okay.
Discovery is when attorneys or you should be finding out where all the assets are, how much equity there is. We're going to try and get an appraisal, find out what the value of a property is. There should be things like title searches done on properties.
You say should. Does that mean
people don't do it.
They don't do it?
Unfortunately, the assumption is that everyone knows what the hell they're doing.
And when you say, are you talking about the attorney should be pulling a title?
Attorneys do typically.
Okay.
But more and more divorces are doing these easier, less expensive type of situations. And so if they're not looking up title searches, I'll give you an example of a really bad story here in a second that recently happened with one of my clients. But it just is what it is. So the point is the discovery phase would be a super important time to, if you've got a house or want to buy a house or want to refinance a house, especially if you have kids and you're like, well, I don't want my kids to be able to stay in the house and so that there's not a lot of disruption. You got to meet with a mortgage lender, whoever your mortgage lender is. Doesn't have to be me. You got to meet with one before the next phase, because the next phase when you actually have your mediation, which is your property settlement agreement, right? Okay. Once there's a property settlement agreement, guys, it's over. Like that's what you agreed to. It's a legally binding instrument. Like that's
in the mediation. The
exactly right.
Objective
you sign off on it. I sign off on it. This is what we're doing. This is it. And people think that not until the final divorce decree is signed, filed, and judge signs off on it, the mediation is the mediation. But
surely during that mediation, if you're like, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that.
Well, you wouldn't finalize that, but because you can't go the next step.
But you also don't want to drag it on either.
Right. And a lot of times time sensitivity is what promotes people to sign off on things before they fully understand the consequences. Right. And this is the point.
And you're in an emotional state.
Right. Like there's always two sides to it. One is like, I want to get rid of you, son of a bitch. Right.
Right.
So, sign this or I'll agree to sign this because I just want to be done.
I just want to be done. Yeah.
And you got to think about that. That's very typically the emotional spot that somebody's in.
I have had two people that have literally just thrown their hands in the air and said, just take it, take the money, take the house, take I can't deal with this, it's not worth it.
Yep. And then the other side, there are some, I've got some very close friends of mine that have gotten divorced and, they, for the most part, did it the right way. But they were smart enough to ask some better questions before they went through with the divorce, right? So again, you got the mediation, then there's a trial if there's a trial, necessary depending on what type of divorce that you're going through. And then you have your final, that's called a memorandum of decision, and then a final divorce decree. So that's kind of the process. But the point is that the property settlement agreement is done well before the end.
Right.
So you have to deal with the stuff earlier in the process than you think that you should do. So let me kind of talk about some scary stories that I've personally encountered, that Dr. Murray shares a lot about, one at a time, because there's lots of things kind of watch out for. And this is, I work hand in hand with a couple of local divorce attorneys specifically to help them fill this need, because there is a lot of misinformation. So first thing is that regardless of what type of divorce somebody is going through in general, they're going to fill out at some point something called a marital balance sheet. Okay. The marital balance sheet is what a divorce attorney would deal with or a CFP would deal with. But basically it's going to kind of show all the assets and liabilities that family has, right? A marital balance sheet. So it's got, I own this car, this house, this car, this gold, this silver, this stocks, this mutual funds, this what, all this, and then then the liabilities of, I owe for this car, I owe for this mortgage, I owe for this rental property. So it's, in theory, it's got everything lined out, right? But when they get to certain parts of the marital balance sheet, the simple question is, okay, you own that property. Well, what's it worth? Here's your first problem. Okay. Appraisals are recommended. Appraisals backed by another realtor that does a really good CMA is probably preferred. But the problem then becomes, well, the thought here is, well, if I'm going to divide the estate and most of the equity, most of the money in my family is in my house, then in theory, all you're taking is the value of the house minus the loan payoff equals the equity,
right?
Divided by 2. False. Right? Because there's zero way to access that money without some sort of cost.
Yeah.
Whether it's a sale, cost incurred,
100%.
or whether it's a refinance, cost incurred. And you're assuming that the liabilities that are on there are the only liabilities that are tied to the property. Because sometimes people, after they buy a house, they forget that they got a pool loan. And that might be a lien tied to the property.
Well, and what about this? What if they don't get an appraisal? Or what if you just get a CMA and then
what if somebody goes to Bear County Appraisal District and takes for value what's on there?
Yeah.
Like
if you don't have an
let me say that a second time. I see this all the time of my value of my house is, according to Bear County Appraisal District, $330,000. Well, let me be really frank with you. Most of the time,
it's not correct.
Taxes lag real values.
Yeah.
Like the assessed valuation at the county is less than reality. So that's not an appraisal. You want that to be low. Why does the appraisal district keep it lower than the real values? I'll just use San Antonio as an example. There's 2 million pissed off people if the value is the real value. There's about 100 appraisers at the county. So they know if they're 5 or 10% under what the real value is, they have fewer people yelling and screaming about it every single year because they can't handle 2 million people, 2 million homeowners arguing. They can handle a couple 100,000.
And you're talking about because it affects their taxes.
Right. Exactly right. So my point is that you can't take for granted what's on the county. You should get an appraiser who's going to get you an appraisal, like who are going to trust with that. And then do you have a realtor involved to get a CMA involved?
Like
so
a good realtor.
A really good realtor, not the 14,000 bad ones in San Antonio as an example.
Yes.
There's like 100 good ones out of the 14,000
Because my guess
ones.
would be that people would have a CMA before an appraisal.
You would think.
Or a CMA without an appraisal.
Yep.
Right? And if you don't have an accurate appraisal, or
CMA.
CMA.
The whole basis of the marital balance sheet is flawed from the base at the beginning if the appraised value is not correct, right? So, I'm going to be the out spouse and the house spouse wants to, give me half the money. And so I say, okay, it's worth $330. It's really worth $380, but I'll take the value of the county. It's $330. Well, I just walked away from a whole lot of equity in the property as the outspouse, and it happens all the time, right? So that's the first thing, right? Separate of appraisals, now we go to the title. So I started talking about, well, is there really only one lien? So there are other liens like tax liens that show up on properties. Okay, a lot of people get divorced over money. Most of the people get divorced over money is because of the lack thereof, not because of too much. So when there's a lack thereof of money, things like state tax liens, IRS tax liens, HOA liens, liens show up on the property that one spouse that might not be paying the bills because they don't do their personal family budget together, right? Show up on the property. So now the house spouse agrees to take the house. And so let's flip it around. Let's assume the value is right. The appraisal value is right. Okay. But I'm going to give the out spouse $100,000 of the $200,000 of equity based on my $100,000 payoff of my mortgage. But my jackass ex didn't tell me that he didn't pay the tax bill for the last 3 years. And there's a $10,000 tax bill on the property. And my jackass ex didn't tell me that when we moved from Tennessee or from a state that has state income tax, they didn't pay their state income tax the last couple of years. So now there's a state income tax lien against the property, right?
Yeah.
So now when I go to sell the house 2 years later,
you can't.
I thought, I can.
You can.
But the $100,000 equity I thought I had might be only $50,000.
Right.
Because of I've got to pay off the state tax lien, the HOA, or whatever IRS lien that's attached to the property as well, because no one did the damn title research up front because they took, right? So you can see how somebody's getting screwed in those types of situations, even if it wasn't intended because somebody didn't ask or they didn't know. No, by the way, when I pull credit and I find out that there's a lien on a property, no one ever knew about it. That's the common answer. I didn't know about that, right?
I didn't know about that.
So there's a big flaw that happens there. Let's talk
Which
about
is also
insurance.
a good thing to maybe get your credit pulled like once a year, I think. And
Or
take a
get on
look
some
at,
sort of credit monitoring for sure. Let's talk about credit. Okay. I actually pulled up from FICO. Just wanted to see what their most recent information is about what a single late payment for good credit scores would do. A single 30-day late. So
just
this
a punch
is not,
in the stomach.
right. So this is separate of. So let's talk about what happens. Right. So in a divorce, let's say that both of you and your spouse, both qualified for the mortgage, and so you're both borrowers on the mortgage.
Okay.
And let's say that in the mediated divorce or in the collaborative divorce, I say, honey, you keep it. Okay. That does not relieve me of my obligation to pay the mortgage. Now the divorce,
because you're on the note.
it's on the note, right? So the divorce decree can say very clearly, honey, you get the house and you're supposed to pay the mortgage, right? But that doesn't remove me from the mortgage.
You have to be refinanced
You
off,
have to
correct?
be refinanced off to get off the mortgage, right? The mortgage specifically. You can be removed from title with the stroke of a pen,
Okay.
but you don't get off the mortgage without a refinance.
And really quick on that too. So whether you're on the note or not, because if you're living in Texas anyway, whether you're on the note or not, you're on the deed.
In Texas, you are if it's a primary residence because it's a community property state,
Right.
so husband and wife sign. Yeah.
And so the moment you get a divorce, do you fall off of that deed?
No, you don't fall off it. There's got to be something called a quit claim deed usually, where you're quitting your claim to the property, right? So a divorce decree satisfies
taken care
that.
of during the divorce? Like, is that something?
It should be.
Okay.
It very rarely happens, right? So
What?
the better divorce attorneys for sure, right?
Okay.
They're having people sign off one property or the other, division of estates, marital assets. That's all happening. It should be done. But again, it's if you're doing a cheaper divorce and saving money and you don't go down the courthouse to do the deed and remove one spouse or the other from it, it's going to come up later.
Yeah.
And while divorces sometimes are amicable day one, things can sour when somebody brings a new boo around.
Just like listening, right? Just listening, I can totally see where what started out as, hey, we're gonna be friends throughout this. We've just painted a picture of people get butthurt.
Yeah, well, and I'll just give you some really good examples, right? So if somebody is not removed from the deed and they didn't specifically identify a property within the divorce, then they still own the damn property. There's nothing that's specifically identified as sole and separate, which means that, hey, I thought that we were good, and 5 years later I go to sell my house, and by the way, I'm remarried with somebody that my ex doesn't like. The title company is going to say, we need her to sign it too.
Yes.
So what do you think her is going to request? Money.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, I'm not going to sign that unless you make it worth my while, right? So you see that happen after the fact if it's not done the right way in the divorce decree or through quit claim. But let's take it a step further, okay? So the outspouse leaves the mortgage with you, clearly identifies the property with you. The outspouse actually signs away and it's no longer his house, but they never, either because they forgot to, didn't know to, or couldn't refinance the outspouse off the existing mortgage, which is why it's in both interests of both parties to get this refinance done, which means talk to a mortgage professional beforehand, right? Then
before the divorce is final.
But not before the divorce is final, before the property settlement agreement.
Got
before it. Before that mediation happens, you got to get this all figured out, right? So the reason is let's say again, amicable divorce, and you've been making the payments on time, you're happy, and whether or not it's a bad thing that happens, like maybe you just get pissed off at your ex because he's dating some hot thing that's half your age and close to your daughter's age, or you just happen to lose your job, and now you can't make the mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Well, his credit is screwed too.
Right.
Whether it was malicious, which I see a lot of.
I was going to say, that would be
or non-malicious intent.
Yeah.
His credit is screwed too because he's still on the mortgage, so he's still obligated from the mortgage perspective, right? So let me just give you an example. A consumer with this is directly from FICO, by the way, a consumer with a 780 credit score with a single 30-day late payment will drop down to about 670.
100 points. Or
more than 100 points.
You said 780?
From 780 to 670.
Yeah.
Yep. If they have 90 days late, which usually, people aren't checking their credit scores every single day. So, and you're not going to fess up that you missed a payment. So you're going to try and figure it out. You're trying to get a job
or you
because you actually liked him. You liked him, or you hate him, and so you're going to just keep on screwing his credit because you have a house. You don't really care, right?
I'm not going anywhere,
right? And this, by the way, happens. This crazy people do crazy things during crazy times, right?
Yeah.
So you got the house, and you're not worried about moving, so you just start missing all your mortgage payments to screw him from being able to buy a house, right? Because if they're 90 days late, first of all, you can't get a new mortgage if you're 30 days late on a mortgage within 12 months.
Right.
Right. So start there.
Miss one payment, you're waiting a year.
And then 9 days late, you're down to a 650 credit score on average, going from 780. 780, by the way, is top 1% of the nation.
I mean.
So let's just say that you're a 680 to 700 range. Your new credit score after 9 days missed payments is under 600.
And you're toast.
On everything. No cars,
right.
Or very high rates on cars,
right.
Not qualifying for a mortgage, all that stuff. So this is super important stuff to take care of before the mediation actually happens, right? So we've talked about appraisal issues. We talked about lien issues. We talked about credit issues, right? The fourth area that people don't even think about, and this actually, through a death, I experienced it with my grandmother's death. She was a co-joint owner of a property with my mother-in-law, right? So it's interesting how this actually plays out. But let's say that the man, just using the example, the man owned a property prior to marriage.
Okay.
And the wife moves in when they get married.
Okay.
And they do an amicable divorce. But the man literally says, honey, you keep the house. Yeah, I want you to keep the house. I want you to keep, I want to disrupt the kids.
Even though it was his before.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. And this is key because if he bought the house before marriage, he was on the mortgage. He was on the insurance. This is what I wanted to point out, the insurance. Okay. So when he qualified for the mortgage, he had to get property homeowners insurance, right? So he's the one that's the insured along with the mortgage company on the insurance.
Okay.
And maybe they live there for 15, 20 years together and the house is literally paid off. And he realizes she's going to have a very little income. She's been staying at home mom. He's going to help out with some child support and alimony. You keep the house, keep your bills down.
Yeah.
Okay. And he felt like he did the right thing. He did a good job. Well, this is a true story that happened. He moves out and 5 years later, they're married. They're after marriage, it got really, 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 really bad after the marriage. Like it was good through the marriage. After the marriage, it got really, really, really bad. And there was a hailstorm here in San Antonio.
Like their relationship got bad?
Yeah, it soured because the one person found out the other person had a relationship prior to the end of the divorce.
I just want to make sure that's what you're talking about.
So it got worse after all the agreements is my point, right? So 5 years later, literally there was a big hailstorm here in San Antonio, right? And it was a metal roof. And it cost $30,000, $40,000 to fix the roof. The house is free and clear. So the woman who's been living there for the last 5 years, paying the tax, paying the bills, paying everything, it's her house, right? She files an insurance claim. Okay. He's the insured. Because she never went back and changed the insured on the insurance.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So
and the house is paid off.
So guess what? The house is paid off. Guess who the check is written out to from the insurance company?
No.
True story.
Oh my gosh.
True story. So now he's got a $30,000 check.
And the relationship is toast.
He can cash it.
Oh.
It's his check.
My gosh.
The insured is him, right? So we experienced this in my family, and I through a death because my grandmother.
Has the story ended yet, or is this still actively happening? Like
no. Like
did he cash the check and like?
He cashed the check. It's his check. He didn't like her anymore.
Oh, no.
Right? And the insurance company is not at fault. She never changed
the insured,
right? So what I'm saying about how much I know this is a real thing and how it probably happens more often than you think is when my mother-in-law inherited a property when my grandmother-in-law died, right? Mm-hmm. They were on the note together. They were on the deed together through a ladybird deed. It doesn't matter. And she passed on, 15 months before there was hailstorm damage done to the house that the grandma lived in. So right before she was selling it, she had to replace the roof. So she filed a claim because there was insurance. And the check was written out to who?
Grandma-in-law?
Grandma, who's dead.
Uh-oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So the only way to deal with it would be to go through probate to get, there was nothing else to probate, by the way. The only assets she had at the time was the house. So the only way to go get that check done would be to go down the courthouse, file a probate claim, go through that whole thing so that the check could be written over to her.
Wow.
Right? So again, in a divorce, a lot of times people are not amicable and helpful.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just one of those things of, did you change your damn insurance? Which is done when you're refinancing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. If you can refinance in the first place. But if they're stuck and they can't refinance, change your insurance, right? That's a big deal.
Well, just like we say, it's always best to get pre-qualified as early as possible.
Yep.
It's like best to do these things as early as possible when the divorce starts or when you make the decision to get a divorce.
Yep.
Because, the longer it goes on, the more things come up, the more things happen, the more feelings get hurt, the harder it is. People start moving out, new relationships, you start sharing kids, things.
Yep.
So as early as possible sounds like the...
Yeah, I'll tell you, and even that might not save you. It depends on how devious your soon-to-be ex is, right? I'll tell you a crazy story. This is another true story. And this was this is a sly fox. There's no other way to explain it. Like, this lady was super sharp and wicked, but super, super smart. So what she did is she decided she wants to be the outspouse. And they agreed that he could keep the equity in the property if she could get all the retirement assets.
Okay. Were they about equal or something?
In theory, right?
Okay.
But they agreed to it. I don't remember the exact balance, but I'm sure they were pretty close to equal, or he wouldn't have signed it, right? He's going to be the house spouse. He's going to keep the house. A requirement of the divorce, the agreement was that he got to keep 100% of the equity in the house as long as he refinanced her off of the property.
Okay.
Within 90 days of the final divorce decree.
Okay.
Okay. If he did not refinance her off the property within 90 days, he was required, according to the decree, to sell the property, and they would split whatever equity there was in the property.
Okay.
So follow that story so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So she's already got the money for the retirement. Okay.
Right.
All he has to do is refinance his house, and he
days.
gets to keep his money in the marriage in the house, right? Because they're trying to work things out and do it nice and civilly. What she did is she said, "Honey, let's go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and buy a house right now, so that when this is all over, I've already got this house, and that way you can go right into refinancing." And so she went and bought a house and started the process before the divorce decree was even final. Decree was final. She closed like within a week, right?
So he doesn't have to be there to sign.
Doesn't have to be there because it's her on her own and the divorce is final, right? So she's now got a house. Okay. They were both on the mortgage that he's going to refinance. That's one of the reasons why she wanted to refinance off. She always pays the bills. So she made sure that she missed a 30-day late mortgage payment on the old house as soon as she closed on her new house, which made him unable to refinance within 90 days,
right?
Which forced the sale, and she got 50% of what was left.
Oh my God.
Well, you can't make that shit up.
That is foxy.
It's foxy and wicked. Wicked.
And
if you're listening to this, she's probably watching this and listening and laughing and like, yes, I did that to that guy.
I mean, what did he do?
Or maybe he married her like that, and that's why they're getting divorced in the first place, right?
What did he do?
Here's the point, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah, the more that you know up front, the better things are.
So, okay, let me ask this then. It seems like the best thing to do is sell the property.
Yes and no.
Because doesn't that uncover, like, you're going to, when you go to sell, all of these like skeletons are going to come out.
I think if you're making it super easy, the answer is yes. That being said, more conversations than others are about not disrupting the children. So that's why a lot of people, and so, if you also, again, do the right things up front before you agree to things and close, so to just protect yourself and your ex and all that stuff, then it's pretty fairly easy to do. Like,
I think,
there's some basic things. Here's a great example because, the ability to refinance is a key, right? The ability for the house spouse to be able to refinance, to be able to pay you out if it is amicable is super important. And it's amazing to me how often basic things, if spoken about early, would be missed. So for example, this husband's specific example for a client of mine 90 days ago, this husband really was going above and beyond to try and help out and make sure that this woman was able to stay in her house with the kids and all this. He had a fluctuating income business, so he didn't want there to be a super high alimony and child support. So what he agreed to was a lot of money up front to her to reduce the monthly outgo, because he didn't know what his year was going to be like next year or the following year, right? So he's really doing front loading for her, which is really a good way, nice thing to do. He didn't have to do that, right? But by doing that, he decreased the amount of the alimony and the child support to a threshold
that doesn't qualify.
And he was relying on $180,000 cash out refinance of the property for him to be able to move on with his life. That was the ability for him to get his own money to move forward.
Yeah.
So now she's given her all the money. And by the way, remember, there's no backsies.
No backsies.
Here's all your money, right? And then let's hope we qualify. Honey, I really am trying to, but I can't give you your money. I cannot. And it was off by like $300.
Oh.
Like if he had agreed to pay her $300 more a month and maybe retain $30,000 of what he gave,
right?
They would have both been able to accomplish what they both wanted.
Wow!
Right. So,
which would have been avoided.
Right. Another one is a lot of people will say, "Well, I'm not going to start paying alimony or child support until the day of the divorce." Well, if your plan is to refinance off quickly and you need that income to qualify, it doesn't work. But if you're really amicable or you have a smart divorce attorney, you start paying alimony and child support 3 or 6 months before you're divorced.
I've never even heard of that before.
Monthly. Because now I've got a proof of this amount 6 months in a row. Boom, boom, boom,
there
boom,
you
boom.
Go.
The sixth payment is after the divorce decree is final. I've got a history of the 6 months. I've got 3 years of continuance. We can close the next month.
I wonder how often that actually happens.
A lot. Because I counsel people. A lot.
On getting the...
Start early. If you're going to divide it early, just take... If you're going to pay somebody $3,000 a month for 3 months early, just take $9,000 less.
I feel like the stories I always hear are how far can we like push it to where we don't have to start paying?
Yep.
And how little
it goes back to the strategy. I think it really just goes back to knowing what you and your out spouse or house spouse, knowing what the opposite, what you both want.
Yeah.
If there's a house involved, you can both accomplish it if done right up front. The main thing I'm trying to point out is once that mediation is over, no backsies.
Right.
You could have shot yourself in the foot. And if my job as a podcast speaker is to help you retain some wealth, then that's one of the main things I'm trying to point out, because I'm seeing it over and over and over again. Don't get screwed out of some equity because you didn't get the right appraisal. Don't get screwed out of some equity because you didn't double check all the liens. Don't get screwed out of insurance money 5 years later because you didn't forget to change your insurance. You know, don't get your credit screwed because you didn't understand that even though you signed over the house, you didn't refinance off the property, and the ex stopped making payments, and your credit's screwed too, right?
Well, and
like you could just go down this list of all the things that are so avoidable if you just know what to look for.
Well, and I think too, talking about the houses that were acquired before marriage, being strategic about the way that those are handled. So that way it's either protected or you're not shocked when it's something that can be a point of negotiation and during the divorce, like learning all of that stuff.
I go back to there's no plan B though. Like
there's no plan B.
If you've got a lot of wealth, your advisor, your attorney's gonna tell you to get a prenup.
Right.
If you're starting off young in life and you're in love, I'm all about take care of each other. And this really does go back to the first best option is don't get divorced. I just gave off a list of, 7, 8, 10 ways to lose lots of money. Why don't you just spend that money
on therapy
and counseling?
Go to therapy.
Do it early, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's figure out a way to stay together.
So like start therapy before you're fighting, right? So my daughter.
And don't do it as a token either. Like you're wasting money if I want to be able to tell my friends that I did everything that I could. Bullshit. Like you're checking a box. You do it if you're really trying to fix and save your marriage, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I would encourage people to get help, just not even help. Talk openly with somebody with a credential that knows what the hell they're talking about to help your marriage go to another level, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think, marriage or money is something that is so high on the list for reasons for getting a divorce or causing problems in a relationship. So again, one more reason to budget and to have those conversations. Yep. Obviously you are our budget coach, and I literally I'm like, next time we have to talk about this. Here's the talking points for next time, because it's easier with a third party to navigate those conversations. Yep. You're not a therapist, but you're a third party that can bring something to the table. Right. And you can bring something to the table and say, how are we going to handle this? And let Randy speak and let me speak. And then again, it's just another avoidance, right? Not avoiding, but it's
another bumper.
Absolutely. Yep. And when there's only one person that's dealing with the finances, there's one spouse being left in the dark 100%. That's not good. I mean, that's where you get into a lot of trouble, and you don't know that, oh my gosh, we haven't been making our mortgage payments. Oh my gosh, there's no money in our 401ks or our IRAs, because that's how they've been paying the bills for the last 6, 8, 10 months. I mean, that's crazy shit.
That's right.
Talking about, I just think it's, incredibly important to be having these conversations with your spouse. Why are you laughing?
I was thinking about some advice my dad gave me that I will not repeat on this show. But
I'm trying to think. I feel like you've told me some really funny things that your dad have said about money and relationships. But
I'm pretty sure he was joking. He told me this. In fact, I will say, who cares? This is not a PG statement. So if you have little ears, please cover them up. My dad told me after a divorce that he had, because my dad's, you guys know from the show that my parents got divorced, right? And in a fit of anger, he told me something. He said, if it flies, if it floats, or if it F's, you should rent it.
Oh my gosh.
Which is really funny if you pay attention. But the point is, get into marriage. Don't do it in Vegas. Let's figure things out ahead of time.
Don't do it in Vegas.
But if once you're married, stay married. Cheaper to keep her for
Randy
sure.
and I were in Vegas before we got married, and on a trip, we had a guy that offered to pay for us to get married, ring and wedding. And we were getting married. It was not still testing it out. No, we were going to get married. We were engaged. No, I can't remember. Anyway, we should have freaking done it. I'm like, what were we thinking?
That's a whole different podcast. Let's not spend way too much money on a wedding. Let's go ahead and use that for a down payment on a house. Let's go ahead and do that kind of stuff.
I mean, I
got 2 daughters I'm saving for, so we'll see what happens. But
let me know how that down payment talk goes with them.
That's right.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Well, that'd be more of a fight with my wife, but Christy will probably win that one. I'll give advice. It doesn't mean I always follow my own advice sometimes. But I hope this was helpful.
Absolutely.
I think that's our time. This is another episode of Sigman Sense. Please like and subscribe and share and follow us on all of our different channels.
Oh, which by the way includes TikTok now.
Oh, we got TikTok now. That's right.
Check out the TikTok.
But until next time, thanks for joining us.